Peace and light, light and peace, brothers and sisters. Welcome to OahspeCollegeUniversity, solution to yesterday's ancient knowledge. Topic of discussion today is who were the Levites. Now, historically, just been a mix-up or a misunderstanding if the Israelites and Levites were together or they work in conjunction together. It amazes me how even though when some people read certain spiritual books, they don't see the difference. And one of the reasons it has to do with is because that spiritual book is not expounding more or giving clarity. So if a book doesn't give you historical background, then you have a problem. Then you really need to be a Spider-Man, try to figure things out. Amazing enough, OahspeCollegeUniversity does a wonderful job capturing historical events, giving explanations to certain people, titles over the years. And this book was launched in 1882. And we're in the year 2023 and people are still not take a grasp of it. We currently have a lot of OahspeCollegeUniversity teachers and OahspeCollegeUniversity instructors who are, telling the society, to the people that, hey, yes, a wonderful book. All you need is just to read the book, and people are not reading it. Who were the Levites? Were they connected with the Israelites? Were the Israelites Levites? In today's topic, we will find out. So I'm going to jump to the OahspeCollegeUniversity for a minute and kind of give clarity and decode this. Here we go. The book of Akabon, chapter 13, verse 5 to 11. The book of Akabon, chapter 13, verse 5 to 11. Lewis. So Lewis are DNA angels, scientific angels, masters of generations. They go to a gender, male and female, and perceive if they can bring out a seed, raise someone who could hear the voice of the Creator, or Suis, or Isus. So Louis are DNA angels. The Louis perceived what manner of man he was, and they led him to take an iron woman to wife. Notice the keynote here, iron. So if you want to bring up a Suis or a prophet, you got to go after the irons. So bore him a son, Asumat. Verse 6, Louis guarded Asumat till he was grown, and they spoke to him, trying him also as to his power to distinguish angel voices. Interesting. Verse 7, him they also inspired to take an iron woman to wife, and she bore a son, Sahaba, who was guarded in the same way, and the angels inspired Sahaba to marry Terata of the line of house of Zed. Terata bore a daughter who was named Edamas, and Edamas bore a son by iron father without a marriage, and she called his name Levi. You see that? So here's the originality of the Levites. Okay, how this came about, but further down the road, we will see the difference. She called his name Levi, signifying joined together, because his toes were not separate on the right foot, nor the fingers separate on the right hand. And Levi grew to be a large man, larger than two large men. This is interesting. Verse 8, Levi, being of fourth birth of iron blood, was not acknowledged an heir to the chosen race and the fetus. Therefore, Levi established a new line, which was called the house of Levi. So, verse 8, we learn that because Levi was not allowed, was not acknowledged as part of the chosen race, being as a fetus, he decided now to establish his own line, which he called the house of Levi. Now, I want you to remember this verse 8, the house of Levi. So he established that line. So he become what you call the tribe of Levi, right? Verse 9, Levi, not being eligible to a fetus wife, was inspired by Louis to take an iron, Metissa, to wife. Metissa bore him a son, Kohat. Kohat, who at maturity was admitted to the order of Ava. So here is the beginning of the Fetish order for Kohat. The third degree of Fetish, at which time he was circumcised. So from verse 8 to 9, we learn here that so as a fetish, you have to get circumcised. So this implies that Levi was not circumcised. So I'm not going to drill down to the similarity, but you be the judge. He was circumcised afterward, called an Israelite. So here we see the beginning of how Kohat, reaching the maturity, he entered the order of Ava, which is the third degree of fetish, and then he was not afterward called Israelite. Here's the beginning of how Israelite, came about. Though, I mean, of course, they had Israelites, before, but, I'm just drilling a point. The name given to the fetish of Egypt. So, of course, before the Israelite was, the fetish that was dwelling in the land of Egypt, the country of Egypt, were also known as Israelite before. Verse 10, Kohat took a wife, Mira, and a devoted worshipper of Jehovah. Mira bore him a son, Amram, who took to wife Jochebed, sister-in-law to Kohat, and she bore him a son, who was Moses. Before Moses' birth, the Levites perceived that he would be capable of the Father's voice, and they called to God, saying, in the next generation, behold, your son will be born. So verse 10 here, we see how Kohat took a wife, Mira, and he brought a son, Amram. Now, Amram also now took a wife called Jochebed. Now, the keynotes for all this generation, or all this, they either took an iron wife or an iron father, in which I will show in my chart in a minute. But it's interesting how, I learned that in verse 10, that the forefather of Moses was actually Levi, who was actually a man, right? So he's the one that established the house of Levi, right? So now it doesn't say anything how the Levitite, generated here, right? It just gives a speak, but in the upcoming chapters in the OahspeCollegeUniversity explains how they came about, the Levites. Okay, so this is why I want you to differentiate who were actually the Levites. So in the book of Aqaba, chapter 18, verse 30 to 31, in the book of Aqaba, chapter 18, verse 30 to 31, from the time of Moses beginning to prepare the migration of Israel until they reached Shakamarat was 4 years, 207 days, and the numbers of Israelites, this is where I'm going. The number of Israelites who were fought out of Egypt was 3,750,000 men, women, and children. And the number, listen to this very carefully, because I know that the Hebrew Israelites and some Christians who want to disagree with the OahspeCollegeUniversity will come and want to create an argument out of this, and the number of other people who accompanied them was 400,000, because they were uncircumcised tribes of Asians. The Hebrew nicknamed them Levites, in other words, imperfect flesh. Verse 31, and Moses commanded the Levites to camp aside, not to mix with the Israelites. And they obeyed them in all things, maintaining that they were true descendants of Abraham. So what I'm saying here is that we clearly see here that there were other people who were not actually Israelite, but they followed Moses out of Egypt. And they were numbered 400,000. So these 400,000 were the Hebrew, which the Israelite labeled Levites. They said they were uncircumcised tribes of the Asian. So this is telling me that if you look at the book of Aqaba, chapter 13, verse 5 to 11, especially at verse 8 in chapter 13, that there was a possibility that Levi, who happened to be the forefather of Moses, probably bore other children that we don't know about. That was not mentioned, but I don't want, of course, OahspeC doesn't say, but when the Castman error, what that means is you should use logistic, common sense, and apply mathematics and make sense out of this. So there's a mixture. So it appears in verse 30 that this 400,000 Levites that was classified by the Hebrews were either Egyptians, okay? It had to be. They were Egyptians or mixtures of some ancient people who had relations or were related to the Israelites somehow, probably cousins, brothers and sisters, so with far relations. They were kind of like related somehow, and these were the ones that that left Egypt with the Israelite. And the conclusion to this will be that we'll have to say that most of them were Egyptians, but the verse 30 all the way down says, because they were uncircumcised tribes of Asians, the Hebrew nicknamed them Levites. So it is interesting how OahspeC decoded who these Levites are. Levites are uncircumcised people who followed Israelites out of Egypt during the migration of Israel out of Egypt. So here you have it. Now, if you're to go to the book of Ichabod, chapter 20, verse 13 to 14, and in not many days, Moses wrote the Levitical laws. For the inner temple of Jehovah was the spoken words only, but the outer temple was written, so that it was said that the Hebrews have two laws, one which no other man know. So these Hebrews were considered the Oralites. Okay? Now, for those who were not eligible by faith, being those who were the Leviticans. You see that? So what Moses did here was that he divided them into two here, saying, hey, the Leviticans, here you go. You're the Oralites, you're the Israelites. So there was a division, but not Leviticans in fact. But you see, here is the decoder. But Anger-ons, who had followed Moses, they followed the Israelite out of Egypt, and for the most part had no God, little judgment, and no learning. So we have to conclude here that these Leviticans, these Levites, were actually Egyptians. And some of them probably were cousins of relations somehow to the Israelites. So they were classified as Leviticans. Okay, Levites. Verse 14. But regarding all those Moses did and taught, how he labored with his own hand, many books could not be written, and it is doubtful if the world ever produced another good or great man. That's interesting. Moses was very interesting. Now I'm going to go to the book of Extra, chapter 10, verse 8 to 10. So how you identify these Leviticans? The book of Extra, chapter 10, verse 8 to 10 actually captured it. This is how you identify the Leviticans from the Israelite. Regarding the fetish of Western Arabia is Africa, for the most part, call themselves Israelite. You see that? Suffice it to say that the two branches still remain. Those who lived under the oral law. So remember, in the book of Ichabod, chapter 20, verse 13 to 14, Moses split the two tribes or the two groups into two, Leviticans and Oralites. So in the book of Extra, chapter 10, verse 8 to 10, is giving you a full summary and decoding and explaining to you the book of Ichabod, chapter 20, verse 13 to 14, regarding the fetish of Western Arabian, who for the most part call themselves Israelite. Suffice to say that the two branches still remain. Those who lived under the oral law and those who lived under the written law. So the written law, the written law were the Leviticans, the Levites now. That is the anger-on of imperfect flesh and spirit. So yeah, OahspeC decodes it in the book of Exodus chapter 10 that these Leviticans were not Israelites. They were anger-on. More 99. I don't want to give a ratio, or should I say a percentage, but my spirit tells me they were Egyptians. Okay. Verse 9, the Leviticans were not sufferers regarding war, and preservation of their seed. So they didn't even care about preserving the seed, right? And consequences of their sin, they brought great shame upon the faiths in general. And the Leviticans examples were evil. You see that? So the Levites were practicing evil. They gained in number faster than the Oralites. You see, so there's a split there. The Oralites and the Levites. The Oralites are true Israelites, which later OahspeCollegeUniversity decoded as Asians. The Leviticans worship the Great Spirit under the names of Lord and God. Verse 10. As for the Oralite, so-called, because their doctrine and teachings were secret and only spoken, being taught orally, man to man and woman to one, they were non-resistant. You see, that's how you differentiate Leviticans from an Israelite. The difference between an Israelite and an Levitites is that the Levites go to war. They worship God. They worship Lord. But the Israelite, the true Israelite who consider themselves Oralite, do not worship God and Lords. They worship the Great Spirit, Jehovah, Yahweh, whatever you want to label that name as, right? And they own nothing, giving all things to the rabbi for the public good. Their practice was love. Look at that. Harmony. Righteously in all things, trusted in the Creator, trusted in Jehovah, whom they worship under the name of Eoi. All the prophets and seers were born of the Oralites. Here you have it, brothers and sisters. The OahspeCollegeUniversity decodes that the Israelites were different from the Levites. The Levites were not Israelites. They were now later on, the Israelites were now known as the Oralites. Okay, now the OahspeCollegeUniversity table of being here. It was a long verse, but you can read it on if you have an OahspeCollegeUniversity 2007 version, you can read it. But to accommodate the Levites, so they may be friendly with me, permit them. This is Moses now. Permit them to worship the Lord their God. Moses, being about to give up his soul, said, "I feel a thorn pricking my side. I know it is the Leviticans. They now being eligible to the secret rights will in time come possess the country and substitute it to their Lord God for the great I am the Lord." You see that? Here you have it. Moses, even knowing that these Leviticans were going to create a problem for them in the future, that they were going to give up the Great Spirit worship, they were going to substitute everything. He was about giving up, but he still said to his Israelites, say, "Hey, permit them to do what they will. Permit them to do what they do." You see, Moses was a kind man. Let them do what they want to do. So, brothers and sisters, here you have it. The Levites decoded using the OahspeCollegeUniversity. The Levites were not Israelites, and they were not considered the true Israelite because they did not even enter the order of Eva. OahspeCollegeUniversity has this big word for it, Emachava. They never even were entered the third degree of Emachava, which was shortened as Eva. You see, now let's look at this because we got to summarize the chart for a minute, right? We see on this chart clearly that there was a Baska who married or who mated with the Iron woman and gave birth to Asumat. Asumat mated with an Iron woman and gave birth to Sayaba. Sayaba mated with Teriba and gave birth to Idamas, right? And then Idamas happens to be a female, and she mated with an Iron man, okay, with an Iron man, and gave birth to what we know today as Levi. Levi was an actual man, okay, and then Levi mated with Metisa to give birth to Kohat. Kohat now mated with Mira to give birth to Amram. Amram now mated with Jochebed to now give birth to Moses. See, OahspeCollegeUniversity does. I learned from this chart that in order for them to produce Moses, the DNA angels, with OahspeCollegeUniversity called Louis, masters of generation, needed to provide an iron blood. Because if there was no iron blood, it would take longer for them to produce Moses. You see, brothers and sisters, we learned today that OahspeC is an historical book, an archaeological book. Not does it not only talk about histories of other people, it does give keynote how these prophets came about. And it tells you the difference between the Levites and the Israelites. Okay, now
So we learned from the OahspeC finally that the Levites were actually a particular branch of Israelites that came from what you call today when they were living in Egypt. So they hanged on. So these are anger overs. Conclusion would be they were Egyptians. And if they were not Egyptians, they probably were cousins or family relations of the Israelites who, of course, at one point they probably migrated. Interesting enough, my conclusion again is that the Levites were not true Israelites, and if they were true Israelites, they did not practice, they did not get the rights or the mantle of Eva, which is uh the rites and ceremony that needs to draft you to become fully a fetus. That they never practiced that, and eventually, as OahspeC dictated, they started worshiping Lord God. So yeah, you have it. Light and peace, brothers and sisters. Subscribe to my YouTube video. More videos to come. OahspeC College University is dedicated to provide solution to yesterday's ancient knowledge. Bye bye now.